We're going to be in 1 Corinthians 13 again today. We've been there for a while. We're slowly making our way. In case you haven't noticed, too, I kind of used 1 Corinthians 13 to spring off and talk about some other passages as well. So you're not just getting 1 Corinthians 13 in case you thought you're getting shortchanged on the rest of the Bible. We're going to continue our series of studies on love today. Something everyone wants to have. We want to be loved and valued and cherished. We want to have that special feeling down in the pits of our stomachs, I think, that tells us somebody truly cares about us and respects us and values us. I think it's the main thing. It's part of life, and it's what Jesus taught his disciples. Not just to love God with all their hearts and souls and minds and strength, which we seem to like to put a lot of attention to that. But the more difficult and the more effort, the bigger effort is to put the love into the people around you, your neighbors, your friends, the people who are good to you, and as we've seen through reading the words of Jesus, the people sometimes that are very difficult to get along with. So if there's ever a teaching that we would want to master, this would be at the top, and it's one that we should spend some time on to understand. And so in 1 Corinthians 13, as Paul addresses some of the problems in the Corinthian church, he also wants to point out to them the alternative, the way that they love each other, the way that they care for each other. We're in a world that's constantly warping the understanding that people have of what it means to be loved. We put a lot of emphasis on the physical. We put a lot of emphasis on being pleased or pleasing somebody. And there's certainly, the Bible talks about, there's certainly reinforcement in the Bible that people need to be cared about. They want feelings and to be close to someone. All those things are part of the way that we're made. We need acceptance and to be respected and cherished. But there are ways to get those things. And so we see those things in 1 Corinthians 13. The way that we treat each other, the positive aspects of love, kindness, and patience that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. And then, as we began talking about last week, some of the things to avoid which are in the way of love. Sometimes the best way to understand what something is to look at what it is not. And so if we look in verse 5, it tells us about love that it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, and it keeps no record of wrongs. He starts with love is not rude. Why do people act rudely? We have our moments when we're thinking about our objective, whatever it is, and we just don't care about how we get there. For me, I struggle at football games. Referees in particular. Nita's laughing. She knows it to be true. I suppose the reason they can't hear me when I'm yelling at the referees, and so I reason sometimes that makes it okay, but really it's not. It's, people around me don't appreciate that either, do they? No, they do not. But I've had my moments when I've let them know how biased they are. And if you could go back and fix some things in your life, maybe you think about some times when you've acted rudely and affected the people around you. If you could attend one week in the Corinthian church, I always kind of wonder what it would be like. I don't think there were people like screaming and yelling at each other. Wouldn't be like a football game kind of atmosphere. But you'd see a gathering of people who wanted to be spiritual. They wanted to look spiritual. We sometimes pick on the Corinthian church. We think, the Corinthian church, very messed up church, and they were. But it was because their priorities were in the wrong place. Spirituality was interesting to them. It had a high priority. They didn't define it very well, but it had a high priority for them. They desired to experience it, to be known for it. They even competed over it, trying to get over top of each other and being more spiritual than the people around them. And that can be a problem. And so we see in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 12, Paul writes, "So it is with you, since you are eager to have spiritual gifts, try to excel in gifts that build up the church. For this reason, anyone who speaks in a tongue should pray that he may interpret what he says. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my mind is unfruitful. So what shall I do? I will pray with my spirit, but I also pray with my mind. I will sing with my spirit, but I will also sing with my mind. If you are praising God with your spirit, how can one who finds himself among those who do not understand say amen to your thanksgiving, since he does not know what you are saying? You may be giving thanks well enough, but the other man is not edified. So Paul talks here about spiritual gifts, and he wants them to excel at spiritual gifts. They wanted to excel at spiritual gifts. And the one that had taken center attention in Corinth was speaking in tongues. They had heard it. They had heard Paul do it. They had heard what they thought was being done in the Corinthian temples around them as priestesses and priests would utter in these ecstatic languages. The women would shave their heads and they'd utter in what was called glossolalia. And they would say things that no one could understand, and everyone assumed this was spiritual stuff. And of course, if you were the only one who could understand it, God must be speaking to you. But then how would it feel to be among somebody, or be next to someone, and God speaking to them, but not to you or to anybody else around? Is that the kind of God that we have? Who has a unique appreciation for you and gives you spirituality and makes everybody else feel low around you? That's not who our God is. But they were using God that way. They were using their spirituality to experience something, to make it seem like they were experiencing something. They believed it, I believe. But the people around them had no understanding or comprehension of what was being said. I wonder sometimes about our Spanish members, what it's like to be in the middle of people who are speaking another language that they can't understand. And I bet it feels a lot like being left out. And in Corinth, people were speaking in a language that absolutely no one could understand. And Paul says that instead of speaking nonsense, they should pray for wisdom to be able to interpret what's being said. Speaking in gibberish was a selfish way to worship. No one could participate with you. No one could praise God when you were done because they wouldn't know what to praise for. Paul says, you may be giving thanks well enough, but the other man is not edified. And that's the problem. It isn't just about you. When you're gathered together to worship together, it isn't just about you, especially in church, but all of the time. What does it mean to be rude? If you've ever had the experience where someone was trying to get ahead of you in line because they had somewhere else to be, you ever been there? They're trying to push in front and you're thinking, how rude is that? And that's exactly what it is all about, right? Waiting in line in the grocery store is kind of like that. None of us wants to be there. So we don't want somebody else pushing ahead. There's a big difference between pushing your way to the front and letting someone else go before you. And every now and then I've been in line at the grocery store and I've had my one or two items in my hand. There'll be some woman or man in front of me with a huge grocery cart full of stuff. And I've had the amazing experience 2 or 3 times here in the past couple of years. Somebody's like, go in front of me. Really kind-hearted thing to do. And it changes the way you feel about your day. Because you think, well, how I'm stuck here. I'm going to be in line for a while. Listening to their bleep, bleep, bleep going through, and not being able to do anything. Show some kindness. Somebody does that for you. It makes your day. It changes how you feel about things. And rudeness, of course, being the opposite, can also change the way you feel about things in a negative way. Every now and then I've gone into a hardware store. Actually, I know somebody who goes in hardware stores a lot. And you see somebody arguing with the salesperson. I know somebody that just about makes a salesperson cry. I mean, he argues with them that hard. Makes his point. He wants to get justice for whatever the product should have been or should have done. And the person arguing, trying to get their way, and they don't really care about how they make somebody feel. And we make other people feel miserable while you're getting what you want. That's rude. Love is a way of life that thinks not just about what you want, but how you're making the people around you feel. And love is not rude leads into the next part of the statement that Paul makes, that love is not self-seeking. It isn't about you. Love is about caring for others. So I remember when my kids were young, 4 or 5 days per week, every week, it seemed like we took a kid to t-ball practice, a graduation, church, or a school event. And if you've had kids, you know what I'm talking about. You've been through all that. You go in someplace day after day. And I know Anita, for a while there were like 6 or 7 years in a row where she'd come home and she'd be like, I'm so tired. And she was, I think she's still, every now and then she says, I'm so tired. And I think it's because she still hasn't caught up on her sleep and her rest from those days when the kids are running around and she had to take them places time after time to practices and games. And many parents feel worn out because you do all that stuff. And you wonder, why do you do that? You want to help those kids to grow up and to feel good about themselves, to learn the most and get the most out of life. And we want the best for them because we love them. And over time, our children become an extension of us, what we would like to leave behind, and yet I don't think most of us mind the sacrifices that we make for our children. It's worth it. Paul says that love is not self-seeking, and with our children, it's an easy lesson to comprehend because we asked me as well, would you go back and change all that and not go to all those things so you wouldn't feel tired? And her answer is, nope, she wouldn't do it. She'd do it all over again. I have the most selfless neighbor in the whole world. Paul says love is not self-seeking. Our children, it's easy. But sometimes it's not as easy with our neighbors, with people we don't know, people we don't have as much invested in. It gets a little bit harder. I was stunned when I moved into my current house, somewhere in 1996, something like that, 1997. Fall came around and I looked into my backyard and there was a man driving a tractor around, getting up leaves in my backyard. I was stunned. What kind of person goes and gets up the leaves in his neighbor's yard? He's got enough leaves in his own yard. Believe me, you can come over and look at his trees. He's got a ton of them. And he had a nice contraption, John Deere tractor, a little thing that cuts them up, spits them out in the back, and he just wanted to store them in the back of my yard. He's like, do you mind if I get your leaves up too? So I can put them into my garden in the spring. I'm like, help yourself. But he'd done this for years for the previous owner. The previous owner told me he would do this, and I'm like, no. And there he was, getting up the leaves in my yard. The most selfless neighbor in the world, I think. Always thinking about ways I could ever show the same care for him that he's shown for other people. I haven't come up with that way yet. Paul goes on to say, love's not selfish. And then he goes on to say, it's not easily angered either. And I throw that statement in there with this other list of stuff because I think that people tend to get angry when it's all about themselves. When you start looking at life and the things going on with yourself, and you think about the impact on yourself and what you could have had, that's when you're going to be rude to a salesperson, right? I didn't get what I wanted. When you're worried about your time and how it's going to be used, and what you could be doing otherwise, that's when we're being selfish sometimes. Sometimes it's good to be, you got to look out for yourself too. I'm not saying never look out for yourself. Nobody go back and quote to your family members. Lee said, there's a time to look out for yourself, no doubt about it, okay? But the effort of love is to care for other people. And so when it's easily angered, if you have an anger problem, you get mad at things that you want and aren't getting. I remember the movie Bruce Almighty. Bruce believes there's an anti-Bruce force at work in the universe. Everything's working against Bruce and what Bruce wants. It's stopping him from getting Anchorman. It's stopping him from getting the things that he wants and having the kinds of experiences that he wants. And everything is working against him, he thinks, and it's God's fault. And yet there beside him is this beautiful, loving woman who is cheering him on through all the challenges that he has. And for all that she does, he keeps ignoring her wants and dreams. And his anger is about God and the universe and has no place to recognize his wife and her love and her emptiness. Paul tells us love is what God is all about. And by nature, it's something that we do for other people. Let's turn and read back into chapter 11, verse 33. We've talked about this in the Lord's Supper occasionally, where we read from 1 Corinthians 11 every now and then with the Lord's Supper. And I know in a lot of churches they will quote part of 1 Corinthians 11 every time they do the Lord's Supper, the part about someone who taking the Lord's Supper in a manner unworthy, an unworthy manner. And we tend to think of unworthy manner as being, oh, I have a sinful life. I made a mistake at some point this week. I better not take the Lord's Supper kind of thing. There's a preacher who didn't let his church take communion for 10 years because he felt like they were making mistakes. They had sin in their lives. Well, Jesus washes away sin. That's kind of the point, right? I mean, you don't want to skip the Lord's Supper because you made a mistake. That'd be kind of doofy. Instead, Paul's message starts with him saying, you're all going to the Lord's Supper, and some people are walking away hungry, and other people are getting drunk at the Lord's table. Well, that's kind of strange to us. We're thinking, how could that possibly happen with, the little wafer we had today, and, even if you had the wines, and even if you were, really ambitious and took all 4 or 5 wines in the center and drank them, you'd still have trouble, I think, getting drunk. But his point is, the way they're treating each other isn't fair and kind and loving. He says, verse 33, so then, my brothers, when you come together to eat, wait for each other. That's the way the passage ends. That's the conclusion he draws from all of this. If anyone is hungry, he should eat at home, so that when you meet together, it may not result in judgment. And when I come, I will give further instructions. So his main concern for what's causing the supper to be eaten in an unworthy manner is the poor people are coming in late because they have hard-working jobs. Maybe they're slaves and their masters don't let them go until a certain hour. And they come in and all the smorgasbord is there early, and the rich people come in and they scarf up all the food, using a good word there, and the poor people show up and it's all gone. Or people are bringing their own food. I've got my own little plate here. It's sort of like potluck, but with no luck. You got your own pot, you bring it in, and you got the unlucky. They go reaching for they bring their little wafers, and that's all they've got is a little slice of bread kind of thing. And he says that's an unworthy way to practice the Lord's Supper. To a Lord who's told you to love one another, to sit there and look over at your neighbor who is hungry right there in front of you, and you do nothing about it. Love can't be selfish. It can't be rude like that. It can't be self-serving. It can't be easily angered. Wait for each other, Paul says, because it's not just about you. Being a Christian is about learning to think about what other people need around you.